Happy Halloween, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I want to thank you all for joining us for some scary stories on imposter fraud. If you can't hear in the background, I am in a haunted house currently. But before our ghost hunters, Pierce and Jason, guide us throughout the webinar, I have some few housekeeping items to go over first. First, everyone is muted to limit disruption. If you have any questions, you're welcome to share them with us using that questions feature in your GoToWebinar control panel. If we have time, we'll discuss those questions together, but if not, our team will follow up with you after the webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you can expect an email within 24 hours with links to the recording and the slides. And finally, upon leaving the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a short survey. Please take a moment to share your feedback with us. We would love to know what you thought. And at this time, I'm going to hand it right over to Pierce to get us started.
All right, thank you, Nancy. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're very glad you're here. I'm Pierce Broscious, and with me today is Jason Keith, our in-house cybersecurity expert here at Saltmarsh. We're glad to have him with us. So Jason, I'll turn it over to you to share a little bit about your background.
All right, well, that's a scary lead in right there for Halloween to say I'm a cybersecurity expert. I don't know if that's true, but I will say this. I'll say that I spend a lot of time working with banks, fintechs, primarily in the technology side, somewhat in the fraud side and online banking as well. So get to hear a lot of stories. And I think that's kind of where this came from in talking with Pierce is for Cybersecurity Month, maybe as we close out, what a great day to pick, make it here at Halloween Day, October 31st. We'd come through and really what we're gonna do today is maybe just tell a few stories. We're gonna spend some time talking about imposter fraud. There's no way we could cover all types of things that are going on right now. But just share a few stories really from the perspective of the end user, the consumer, the individual, not so much from a broader what I should do as an organization to protect myself from fraud. And I'm running slides, so everybody please be patient with me because I'm slow in making the slides move here. But to kind of give you a process today, really what we'll do is Pierce will talk a little bit about where things are, where they stand statistically. Then we're going to go through those stories, as I mentioned. I'm going to scare you even more than you're already scared by the end of this, where we talk about artificial intelligence, because while it has the ability to maybe be a great helper, it also has the ability to be a great fraudster. And there's some evidence already that we're seeing that's already occurring there from a fraud perspective. And then we're going to try to give you some general concepts, some thoughts on rules maybe that you can follow with the theory that, and you'll hear this over and over and over again as we talk today, but the theory that it's getting very hard to know if something is fraudulent or not. So you almost have to we've kind of blown up maybe some of the old-fashioned thoughts on, looking for a misspelling in an email or maybe somebody's not speaking clearly or something like that, and really moving to the, okay, well, what is it that I need to tell myself to do to make sure that I protect myself, just from things in general, instead of trying to be worried about, can I pick it out or can I not? Because it's hard to do. It really is getting hard to do. For those that really are experts, I think it's getting very hard to do. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But first, Pierce, if you want to just go ahead and run away with the, kind of the update on where things stand today, and we'll keep going.
Sure. Yeah, great. So, yeah, let's start by looking at where we are today in terms of fraud. So the statistics you see here on the screen, in 2022, the Federal Trade Commission received 2.4 million reports of fraud that year. A statistic that might surprise some folks is that younger adults were actually more likely to be defrauded, whereas older adults were more likely to lose larger sums of money. A separate study conducted by AARP in May of 2023 found that only about 15% of fraud victims contacted law enforcement regarding their incident. The top reasons given were that they felt too embarrassed or too guilty about what happened, or they simply believed that law enforcement couldn't help. It's natural to feel that way after being tricked, and it's okay to be tricked. These individuals certainly weren't alone. However, by not contacting law enforcement, essentially they're letting the fraudsters off the hook, and they're not receiving help from those who are able to help. So Jason, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I guess I think it was important to maybe put the reasons given. Why, again, it's AARP study. It's not a huge study, but it involved, I think, maybe 1,000 folks they kind of polled and canvassed, and and had some good statistical sampling in it. But I thought it was interesting. We're embarrassed, we're guilty, we're convinced law enforcement can help. And I think that's a natural response for us. But I think the important thing, and you'll see today, we'll tell some stories on ourselves a little bit, but it's very easy to get caught. We all are susceptible to being caught. I will be caught. Pierce, you'll be caught at some point. Like we all get probably caught by something. And, you know, the tendency to hide it and keep it away keeps us from knowing the full size and scope of this. The other piece is it's really important. As soon as you realize something's happened to you, the faster you reach out to your financial institutions, the faster you reach out to fraud protection personnel, law enforcement, the more likely you get some of that money back, perhaps. And also the more you tell the powers that be about the scope of the problem, maybe the more resources get devoted to it, the more rules get passed, the more laws get added that kind of protect us over time. So I think, you know, if you take that 2.4 million and you say, is FTC, you know, could we back into and say FTC is really only getting 15%? What's that, 16 million? I think as much, you know, we probably would all say that sounds reasonable. There's probably 16 million people that have some sort of fraudulent activity occur this year. Maybe it's a lot larger than that. But so the importance of just allowing yourself to say, it's okay, I've been caught, it happens, but I'm going to reach out and say loudly to somebody, hey, this happened to me. Is there anything you can do to help me? I think that's important to do. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Pierce, go ahead with the story.
Right. Yeah. Those are great points. You know, and so we'll start out with the first story that involves two individuals. So the story of Bruce and Evelyn. So Evelyn was a 50-year-old woman who had recently went through a bad breakup, and she turned to online dating in hopes of finding new love. She matched with a nice-looking businessman named Bruce. They got off to a good start, and she really liked that he was, quote, sweet, attentive, and not at all aggressive. They messaged each other every day using pet names and saying things like boyfriend and girlfriend, so things were getting serious. Bruce told Evelyn that he was a partner at a venture capital firm, but ran a crypto trading studio on the side. If Evelyn liked, he could introduce her to investing, beginning with a small sum of $4,000. To pull off his advanced trading strategy, Evelyn would need to use a crypto platform called CEG. It looked legitimate to her, so she complied and then was instructed by Bruce to place a series of trades that got her heart racing. She didn't understand what she was doing, but it was fun, and within a half hour, she was already up 20%, or so she thought. Bruce went further. He said to maximize profit, she would need to trade with at least $200,000. She was taken aback at first, but then she worried that her resistance would jeopardize their relationship. So they continued to trade together, and over the course of several months, Evelyn had withdrawn $300,000 from her retirement account, incurring taxes and a penalty in doing so. On Bruce's investment platform, she saw that her account had grown to over $500,000. So having made so much money, she requested a large withdrawal. And she was surprised when Bruce met that with resistance and offense, saying, "Why are you always in doubt?" This irked Evelyn, and through some online searches, she found out that the picture of Bruce's office had been used in a scam. Her last bit of hope vanished when Bruce said that to make a withdrawal from her account, she would need to deposit an additional 15% of its value. Right. After she refused, he continued to press her, and after which point she finally gave up. So Jason, tell us about what's going on here.
Well, I think we're going to introduce our first term that Nancy actually said this was the scariest term in the whole presentation when we were talking about this a little bit earlier. But you know, there's terminology that's come lately called pig butchering. And the theory is that what occurred here, you can kind of follow it through the story that Pierce just told. It's counterintuitive for us to think that a fraudster spends time really developing this over a long period of time, but they spent months. And I can tell you, there's so many stories. I read several stories about this, and I've personally heard of several stories like this over time where somebody develops a friendship and money isn't even part of the conversation up front. And over the course of months and really building that relationship, all online, you know, in most of the cases, and really today, particularly the one we're talking about, all online, never met anybody, but you start to build a friendship and you start to really trust that person on the other side. They introduce the money, and in most cases, it's more of a well, I'm doing this thing, it's really been working out well for me, but they don't ask you to invest at first. And then they ask you to invest a little. I actually read a story, Pierce, where somebody said, I don't think I trust this, but they invested a little, like $500, and they doubled it. And they said, can I get it back? And they gave them the money back. So they actually had made money off of the fraudster, but then that made them trust them and they put their life savings in. Happens over and over again. Pig butchering terminology here is because they're kind of fattening you up. They're playing on your greed and your trust a little bit and saying, well, if I can make 50%, why wouldn't I? So the websites are very believable. The folks you're dealing with are very believable and often very trustworthy sounding, and they spend a long time developing you. It's scary, but you would be shocked at the size of losses that are occurring from this. Maybe it's crypto, most of the time it is, but not always. It can be other things as well. In this case, it was, I believe, a crypto scam, Pierce, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
It's a website you log into. It looks realistic. It's believable, but ultimately, what you're experiencing here is somebody that took the time to build into you, to pour into you, convince you they were telling the truth. You slowly gave up your life savings. None of us would do that up front at first. But you slowly gave up your life savings and eventually lost it all through this. When you get, and you don't know until you go to pull it out, because it looks like on paper you're really up and you're doing well. Very scary, and I think a great example of an imposter type fraud that's going on right now, and I think often happens and hits the investment world. Pierce, isn't that right?
Yes, yeah, that's it's quite surprising to, especially with the Bruce walking Evelyn through these advanced trading techniques, creating that distraction. There's all types of, in the investment world, when it sounds too good to be true, even in this story, I remember reading that, Evelyn said there's just no way that Bruce could be printing money, but yet she continued to believe that this was occurring. Sometimes when it sounds too good to be true, oftentimes it is. Those are great points, Jason.
There's a reason for the age-old isms like that say, it's too good to be true. It probably is. Well, that's really the case over time. And in many ways, this is just an old fraud story with a new cover. We've seen things like this before in the past. It was just much harder to do. Now you got to think about the person on the other end has almost no likelihood of being arrested unless they're in the US and they're tracked down. So they can really work with you over a long period of time. And some very intelligent people are sometimes on the other end. And with that, we'll go on kind of to our next story.
Yeah, so our next story is about a woman from Ontario named Amanda, who one day received a call from who she thought was a representative at her bank. This representative informed her of a serious situation unfolding. Employees at the bank were trying to hack into her account, and it was only a matter of time before they would be able to withdraw all of her funds. This representative seemed to know everything about her. He listed her name and address, her bank account information, and even the balance on her credit card. He sounded official, and all of that information was correct. So this incident drew the woman into a panic. The representative explained that the only way to protect her money and keep it safe was to withdraw it from her account at the bank and then resend it to the bank through a Bitcoin ATM. Having known so much about her, this woman trusted the representative on the phone, and she followed through with his instructions. Later, after she visited the bank branch in question, she was surprised to find out that there was no chaos unfolding at all. The employees weren't trying to get into her account, and the person that she talked to on the phone was in fact an imposter. She ended up losing $12,000 to this scam. Jason, what kind of technique was used here?
Well, I think, unfortunately, this is another very common one that's going around. And we kind of forgot to mention on the last one, and we'll mention all the way through. Really, it's going to be one of those things where we want to stop and we want to say, I want to communicate with my financial institution or whoever it is that claims to be contacting me in my own way. I'm going to hang up the phone. I'm going to not click that link. I'm going to find a way to validate this information is true. Just like in the first story, she was able to do some research and eventually validate it wasn't correct. How much more value would there have been had she stopped and said, I don't invest money with somebody that I've never met in person, right? It's going to be kind of the same thing here. what happened, and it's very common, unfortunately, and even there's a bit of phishing going on out there. I don't know if you ever I've gotten text messages where they say, did your Chase account had a $33 fraudulent charge. Did you authorize this? Yes or no? And this is, financial institutions used to use this as a great way, and some are still using it as a great way to kind of let you know when something has occurred on your account. The trouble is, if you reply one and it goes back, they know a few things. They know it's an active phone number. They know who you are from that. They know you have a Chase account, and they know that you're expecting a phone call, quite possibly from them about it. So if you start thinking about all the information that's already out there anyway, once they validated that, they know a lot of the pieces. And in this case, this is another one of those situations where they knew all the right information. They probably asked all the right questions. They even validated quite a bit of the information for you so you get comfortable. And then ultimately, they got you in a place where you gave up information that led to you losing some money. And the old stuff and the true stuff that you get and the messages from your financial institutions now say, if you don't trust it, just hang up and call the number on the back of the card. Or if you don't trust it, reach out to us. You know how to find your bank, for example. And in this case, that's really exactly what happened. So, somehow they got a hold of enough information. I personally had something similar to this happen to me recently, and it wasn't fraudulent. And I knew better, but I had a credit card company call and say my wife's card had been compromised, and I got kind of in a hurry and worried about it. And I validated the last four of my social before I was like, wait a minute, I don't know if I trust you. I need to hang up and call back. I hung up and called back. Fortunately, it was a valid communication, but it's impossible to know these days. And so we're looking forward kind of to the rules at the end, but kind of pulling back. One of those things we're going to start telling ourselves over and over again is I don't need to be rushed. I don't need to be in a hurry. They created a situation. There was chaos. There was concern the person was going to lose money. And they let that get the better of their judgment, and they went ahead and they made some decisions they might not otherwise have made. So we're going to encourage ourselves to slow down and give ourselves the ability to say it's okay for me to slow down and wait and validate this and make sure it's okay.
Right. Yeah. It's certainly thinking about how elaborate these schemes are. To really just get people tricked into thinking that that this is actually occurring. Just knowing all that information about a person, it's natural to think that that's a legitimate situation. I remember, Jason, you were telling me about a story that happened, another story that involved your loved ones. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and again, I told you at the beginning of this, I'm running the slides. I moved on to the slides, so you probably just focused on Jason's drunk and thought, what in the world is this slide about? But I can tell you that not that long ago, as a matter of fact, a month and a half, 2 months ago, my father called, and it was about 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the afternoon on a work day. And sometimes I'm in the middle of a call and can't pick up the phone. Fortunately, that day I did. And he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine. What's up?" And he said, "I'm on the phone with an attorney, and there's a guy in the background that's crying that sounds like you. And I thought it was you. And he's saying, I need to send money now to keep you from going to jail. You've been arrested and picked up for DUI." Of course, at first I'm like, Dad, come on. When have you ever known me to be in any kind of trouble like this? But was a very, if you go back to kind of the earlier conversation we're just having, it was one of those situations where you find a loved one, you put some pressure on, you make them feel like they have to react right away. And my father was intelligent enough to know that he thought it was a fraud, but it sounded so much like me, he wasn't sure. And if you go and you look at the FTC's website in May of 23, somewhere, not very long ago, they put out an alert saying that a lot of people were getting AI-powered phishing messages about loved ones. So that probably was very likely my voice. They took something like this, that we've recorded or we're about to record and put out onto YouTube or wherever we put this. I don't know what Nancy will do with it, and they've got my voice, and then they've been able to feed it into the computer and make it sound like me. It probably was my voice he heard. And so it was enough to make him feel like, I don't know. So again, we're going to allow ourselves the space in that situation and the ability to say, I'm just going to back off for a minute. There's nothing that time won't solve here for a few minutes. I'm going to make sure this is real and valid. And, I could see myself falling for something similar, but I guess maybe this is a good public service announcement to you that, and we'll talk about it in AI, you can't trust what you hear on the phone. You can't trust what you see in a video anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, and it's like you said, getting so advanced, and just there's ways to combat that. It is kind of frightening to think about, but I think everyone will be really comforted to know when we're going to share later is some rules, and we'll get into that. But yes, those will be helpful, to combat these just as they get more and more advanced fraud techniques.
And with that, I think you're going to talk a little bit about, we talked about phishing, which is, we're not great with names here in the cybersecurity space, which is voicemail phishing or voice phishing. It could be both a voicemail or just a phone call. And then we'll talk about smishing, which is SMS or text phishing, and phishing with a PH, which is phishing with an email. I don't know why we can't come up with some more unique terminology, but they're all shings.
Right. Yeah. And these stories, involve a similar situation. Someone receiving, a text or email, like you mentioned, that person who received the text from what they thought was their bank, asking them to authorize that $35 purchase. And it's something that most people wouldn't think twice about. It's if you would receive that type of message, you'd think, no, I of course I didn't authorize that. But after clicking that link, not really thinking about who it's coming from, that person was allowed themselves to fall victim to an incident where someone reached out, said they'd be mailing them a new debit card, and they trusted this person on the phone since they said they were from their bank. However, as they mailed them this person their new debit card, the bank representative kept calling back to give status updates, and each time they verified this individual's ID through codes that they received on their phone. Well, those codes were actually real codes from their bank, but they were actually being initiated by this fraudster to send wires outside of this person's account. Unfortunately, they weren't able to catch the fraud until they actually visited the local bank branch to find out that their $160,000 account was all gone. It's really tough to hear about this type of situation. That the next story involves a senior who was defrauded out of thousands of dollars through an email that he received from someone posing as Apple tech support. This senior had spent his career in law, and he had an MBA, so he was a smart individual. They both were, but just with these elaborate techniques and these real situations that these fraudsters are creating, just goes to show that it can be easier than people think to fall into this. Being tricked has nothing to do with intelligence. So I know we've talked about scams that are happening today. So Jason, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you to talk about what we'll need to think about in the future when it comes to artificial intelligence.
Right. Well, let's, and I will hit it later too, but maybe just because we talked about the story, you'll probably notice when you get one of those text messages with numbers, from somebody when you requested it and you get the numbers and you have to plug it in somewhere else and it says, our bank will never call you and ask you for this. That's something you probably ought to go ahead and put as a rule. It says, I'm never going to have to read off numbers over the phone to somebody. And if I do, I just can't trust it. I got to start over again, because that's that one last line of defense. They can know, there's so much information about you out there. I don't know about you all, but I've received so many notifications that breaches have involved my information. So I know my socials out there. I'm sure it is. I know my date of birth. You could probably go on a genealogy website and figure out my mother's maiden name. You can get all of this information about a person. You can have a receipt from a transaction. You can have part of it. And you can have a login information. But those numbers are what we'll talk a little bit later, sort of a bit of MFA, right? Multi-factor authentication. So it's one more thing that you have that isn't something that people can just steal from you. They've got to get that from you in some way. And so it's so important anytime you find yourself getting those numbers to your phone to go, I don't know if I should be sending that on to anybody else. I have to have known why I requested it and why I want it. And I'm never going to be speaking with somebody that's going to ask me for those. They're going to If they are, then I'm trying to think of a situation where somebody's asking you for the numbers that just went to your phone that would be valid. And maybe there are. Somebody will send me a message after this saying, here's the valid reason why it would be. But I would tell you that in that situation, I still wouldn't trust it. And I'd probably just say, I'm going to find some other way to do this type of a transaction in a way that I trust and I'm comfortable. With that said, we kind of move on to, I think we're talking about AI. And I know we already mentioned the vishing thing. I've started to come to believe, what my father experienced was an AI type attack or an AI assisted attack. And that's kind of the thing with artificial intelligence is we're all a little nervous of it right now, a little scared of it. But what most people say is it's really going to enhance, what we can do from a productivity standpoint, what we can do to protect from an anti-fraud perspective. But if you think about that, then the flip side of that is it can also enhance a fraudster and what they do, the way they do their work. And some things to be thinking about from artificial intelligence is that it's not going to get tired. If you set it to a path, it's going to keep going because it doesn't need to sleep. It's going to be way more intelligent than you realize it is. It's already there. It can talk, it can chat, it can have conversations with you. You can think already in some cases. You can think you're talking to a human, you're not anymore. And it can react and respond and understand what you're asking for. And it's going to have the ability to learn. So it can go out and kind of suck in all that information on social media about you, all the information that's out there about you, and design kind of a custom tailored attack to come at you. And, we mentioned it as well, but I think we've reached the point, many experts, and I think I'm talking about highly sought after skilled experts that, are often in high level court cases about whether or not something is real or not real, have said we've really reached that tipping point where now it's hard to know, is the picture really true or not? We're past the point where we can determine easily if something is fake or real. So again, kind of going back to where we'll move into the things that we think you ought to consider doing long-term for yourself to protect yourself. It's one of those, it's hard to spot the fraudster. It's not that they misspelled the word anymore. Occasionally that happens. That's great if you can catch it, but it's probably going to be just as good, maybe even better than the real thing sometimes when you get that email in, or when you get that text in, or when you have that phone call come in. You may be surprised to find that the fraudster's better, more sophisticated, and more believable than the person that's actually doing it for real.
Yeah, I'll say that it's it's scary to think about a future like that, and there's just sounds like there's a lot of ways that you can fall into these types of situations, believing that something's real when in fact it's fake. With those advancements in AI. So, how can we combat these types of risks? What should we do?
Well, and back to I want to make sure I'm clear with everybody that is watching this. The future is already here from an artificial intelligence perspective. We're not talking about what will be 3 years from now. We're talking about active frauds occurring now, assisted by AI. If you've all heard of ChatGPT, it's been talked about so much over the last year. There's something called FraudGPT, which is really based off of that. But it's basically fraud-enabled AI that's trying to, or AI-enabled fraud that is trying to help fool folks, to help fraudsters gain money, right? So, I mean, it's there. These are real attacks. With that said, if we can admit to ourselves that we probably are going to very soon have a hard time knowing if something is real or fake, we've come up with what we're going to call cyber tenants. Those are about as big a word as we're going to use in these rules here today. With the theory, as you look at this quote here on the screen, that if we can kind of try to keep it simple and make it understandable for ourselves, not for you, but for me, if I can say, hey, I've got some general rules I'm going to follow in my own life, perhaps we'll come to a place where we can get comfortable that this is what I can do, and I can at least try to be harder to attack than the next person. And ultimately, maybe that's really the best we can hope for, is that fraudsters will always exist, but can we make ourselves a little bit harder to be fooled? And with that, I've kind of got it broken down in, there's the I won't do, and there's the I will do. And we've covered these a lot, right, already, as we've talked through this. So if you think about it, if you wanted to be 100% protected, you'd say, I'm never going to click a link in an email. I'm never going to click a link in a text message. I'm never going to do anything anybody ever calls me on the phone to do. Like those are the, if you don't do any of that, it's going to be pretty hard to defraud you, right? Unfortunately, we sometimes have to give a little bit. I realize occasionally in an email there's something that you have to click on or you feel like you have to click on. Text message, I'm still struggling to come up with a reason I might need to click on a link in one. But what I would encourage you to do every time that you can, and tell yourself, like, I'm going to try to never click on something inside of an email. I'm going to try not to click on the link or a PDF or an attachment or something that exists, that's sent to me. I'm going to see, is there a way I can go search for it myself and find it? If I do, you've really cut down a lot of the avenues of attack, both from the text message, both from the email. And then moving on to, I guess this next bullet point really is going to be more of the phone call or the voicemail or the communication. Somebody reaches out to you through a direct message in social media, something like that. I'm going to tell myself there's never a situation where somebody I've met online that I don't know in person is, when they reached out to me, where I'm going to need to give that MFA code. We talked about that earlier, the numbers that come to you, or my social security. I'm going to say, you initiated this conversation with me, even if it was 3 months ago, and I've slowly been working back and forth with you. And say, you initiated this conversation. I want to initiate it. I have to be the one that creates the conversation if I'm going to be comfortable sharing that kind of information. So one thing I think you should feel empowered to do that many of us struggle is to just hang up the phone. There's really, most of the really successful ways to take money create a sense of urgency, make us scared, make us feel like, the IRS is coming to arrest you, or make you feel like somebody's in jail and you got to get them out. In the case of my father, and where he was, had the phishing call for me, I would encourage you to say, I can hang up. There's no financial decision that I have to make right now. I'm going to hang up, call back, maybe even better, don't answer the phone if you don't know the number. I know that's not very friendly, but I've really gotten to be a bit of a fan of it. Let's see if they leave a voicemail, because that gives you a chance to think about what it is that they're calling you for. You're not automatically sucked into it. If it's somebody you know, answer it, but still be cautious. People can fake phone numbers. People can fake email addresses. As you've learned probably from the phishing things, people can make it look like it's coming from somewhere it isn't. But if you let them leave a voicemail first, usually gives you a chance to at least sit for a second and think about it, right? Next one on here is, I'm not going to allow myself to believe that I'm foolish. Going back to that study earlier, I'm not going to allow myself to be embarrassed by getting fooled. I am going to very quickly report my fraud concerns to financial institutions that it involves, or even if it doesn't involve them. In some cases, it may make sense if I've disclosed certain information. I may want to call them and tell them, hey, they've got some of this. They haven't hit you yet, but I want to add a fraud alert onto my account. So I'm gonna be proactive in reaching out, allow myself to feel okay with that, and say, some brilliant people, like Pierce, that last story you told, he had been a long-term law enforcement officer, MBA. He was a very intelligent man that actually did this kind of stuff for a living, and he got fooled. We can all be fooled. It can happen. So let's give ourselves the freedom to say, I'm gonna raise my hand and let people know this has happened, and I want you to be on the watch out. Is there anything you can do to kind of help me get some of this back? Moving on to the second slide, and then this is it for the rules, right? The cyber tenants, we call them. I would say it's important to think about not reusing passwords. It's so frustrating when you have 150, 200 different things to log into as a consumer. I've done it, and sometimes I do it with things I don't really care that much. There's certain things, it doesn't matter if somebody gets into it. There's no credit card information in there, no real sensitive information. Maybe you will be willing to reuse a password. But on important accounts, I would suggest, or I would say, please don't reuse the same one. Because if they know your user ID and they know your password on one, they can test it out somewhere else. And that's, there's a thing called credential stuffing where it actually is automated and they're looking for ways to get into stuff based on passwords they know that exist out there that have already been compromised. One thing you can do to protect yourself is to have different unique passwords and maybe even different unique user IDs, because those are two pieces that really get you in. If you're going to make them strong and make them different, that's going to help you a lot. Some people accomplish that using something called a password manager, which allows you to store a whole bunch of passwords and make very complex passwords and then have to remember one, which makes life a little bit easier. The downside of that is, your password manager can be hacked as well. And if it is, then that information's out there, but it's harder. It's one door to protect, so to speak.
Yeah. So Jason, I want to ask about a particular account. So going back to, you mentioned, if there's certain accounts that you may not need to include strong passwords on. I'm a Firehouse Subs rewards member, and I've included my birthday. Each year I get a free sub on my birthday. Is that an account that I should consider having a strong password?
Well, I guess everything should probably have a password that's hard to guess. But if I were saying, would your life be upended if somebody got into that? Probably not, right? I mean, maybe they buy themselves 2 or 3 Firehouse subs before you get, if you've saved a credit card in there. I don't know if you've saved a credit card in there, there may be some ways to get a little bit of money out, but you've kind of minimized your risk, right? If it's a credit card, you've got the potential to be able to say that's fraudulent transaction, try to claw that money back as well. But ultimately, it's not the keys to the kingdom. It's not your 401k. It's not your big savings or checking account. It's not your investment account. It's not something that would, if it all went away, really, really create a big problem for you. So maybe you could get by with having an easier to remember password in that situation. But what's funny is, we'll talk a little bit about multi-factor here now. Probably on that Firehouse Subs, when you go buy something, sometimes it texts you a set of numbers that you have to put in and say, yep, this was me, right? Even they have said, yeah, I know, like Chipotle does it. I know some of the different, things that I go, McDonald's app will do it. They'll actually text you and say, was this really you? Put this number in, right? I mean, they're trying to protect from fraud on their side. If you think about that, a small transaction really for most, if they're having to protect that way with it, then how much more important is multi-factor authentication, which is, we've talked about it already, but it's the one thing you can probably do to protect yourself more than others. And a lot of us have accounts with companies where they've been around for a while, and the companies don't want to force us to use multi-factor authentication and anchor us. So they, in many cases, have it as an option, but they haven't deployed it or forced it to be deployed in some cases. So I would encourage you, on every account you can think of, if you can add that extra, and I know it's annoying to either have to go to the app and click yes or approve or type in a number, or get the text message, type in a number. It still is expected to, I think, depends on who you read, but 60 to 90, 95% of all attacks are stopped by that. Even if they have your password, even if they have your credential, even if they know your date of birth, they still need that to actually pull money out a lot of times. So in many ways, that's become the most important thing that we can do, which is why they've had to create all these different fraud stories and conversations to try to get us to get that up, because it really is a powerful tool. So if you find yourself with accounts that don't have multi-factor authentication, I would encourage you, when you log in, it's probably in the place where you got to change your password, look and see, is there a way to enable that and add a little bit more security for you. And then let's see where we're at here on the rules set. Last thing I would say is, and we talked about it earlier too, just don't allow yourself to be rushed into making a decision. Most of the fraud stories that really end up taking a lot of money from folks are because you feel like you have to act quickly. You feel like somebody's in trouble. You feel like you're in trouble. And rarely, I'm not aware of any situation where the police have actually said, I'm not going to arrest you if you send me money right now, but otherwise I'm on my way to your house with a group of folks to arrest you. It's just not the way it works, right? Or the IRS, same thing. If they're going to come arrest you, they're going to arrest you. They're not waiting and calling you on the way to your house to arrest you, saying, well, if you transfer this money through Western Union, $10,000 right away, we'll stop. Right? This is not the way it works. So allow yourself to stop and relax and not get stressed and rushed. If it involves money, you should be able to take 10 minutes and think about it. You should be able to hang up, recommunicate with that person in some other way, and think about
it. Yeah, those are great points, Jason. And it feels refreshing to hear that there's a set of rules, simplified rules that we can stick to help combat the risk of falling victim to one of these advanced fraud schemes. It's quite the dichotomy. Thinking about, there's a simple set of rules to protect against these advanced techniques. So it's really refreshing to hear. I hope our audience feels confident that with these rules that they feel protected. They can help protect themselves and their loved ones. Should they find themselves in a fraud situation. So with that, I'll go ahead and wrap us up. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Jason, for sharing your expertise with us. Again, the point of what we're sharing with you today is to not fully, not fully arm you against an impenetrable, force against fraud. But we wanted to provide these stories as a way of, having exposure to similar situations. Should you find yourself, in that type of situation, so you can know what to do. Know your personal set of rules. Keep, coming back to those set of rules. Because fraud has been around a long time, even before the internet. As Jason mentioned with AI, it's only getting more advanced. So getting harder to know what's real versus what's fake. So having that personal set of rules to live by and stick to will help you avoid falling victim to those fake situations that seem really real. So we've included our contact information here. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. We've got our emails, and we'll include some social media information for Saltmarsh about our firm. Thanks again for everyone joining us. We hope you all have a great Halloween and stay safe, and hope everyone gets lots of candy and just enjoys the spooky night with friends and family. So thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Right. So thank you, Pierce and Jason. That was actually a really good presentation. I never knew what pig butchering was. And I would say that's kind of like eye-opening to know like what that actually is now. You're kind of like fattening up a person to give you all of their money. But as mentioned before at the beginning of this webinar, it was recorded and you will all receive a link to it along with the slide deck. You might want to check your spam and junk folders in case it lands there due to your security filters. If you don't receive it, just reach out to us and we'll send it right over to you. And remember, at the end of this webinar, you will receive a survey. Please leave us your feedback. We'd like to know what you thought. But thank you again for joining us. Happy Halloween.
Thank you.